GoForThe2.com. We're into the Week 5 predictions of the college football season. What can you say but another great weekend of college football this past weekend? That's what epitomizes this great sport. We have some great games on tap this coming weekend. Let's get right into it. 13th ranked Alabama goes to Athens to face off against the number 9 Georgia Bulldogs. It's a rematch of the 2012 SEC championship game in which Georgia was stopped on the 5-yard line. Alabama went on to beat Notre Dame in the national championship. This is their first true road test of the season. Alabama opened up with Wisconsin on a neutral field site. It's an SEC battle. You look at this Alabama offense overall coming off a 34-0 performance against UL Monroe. They bounced back very nicely off the loss to Ole Miss at home last week in Tuscaloosa. They now travel to Athens to face off against a solid group in Georgia. Alabama averaging 35.7 points per game, led by Jake Coker, who's completing 55.8% of his passes. Very balanced Alabama is, rushing and passing the football. They're averaging around 210 rushing yards per game, averaging 257 passing yards per game through the air. They have weapons at their disposal. Mulaney stepped up in recent weeks. And you look at this Alabama defense, very solid in run support. They're only giving up 56 rushing yards per game. But it's the secondary that I have concerns of this matchup. They're giving up about 210 passing yards per game. And more importantly, a couple of weeks ago, were exploited by Ole Miss and quarterback Chad Kelly. They're still -2 in turnover margin, have not been able to create turnovers consistently, and they're going to need that to get this victory this coming weekend. That's why I like Georgia in this matchup. You're talking about a Georgia team that's averaging 45.8 points per game, very balanced on the offensive side of the ball. They're averaging around 254 rushing yards per game and throwing for 233 passing yards per game. They have a solid quarterback in Grayson Lambert, who completed 76% of his passes, and more importantly, 2 weeks ago came off a 24 of 25 performance in terms of completions, 24 of 25 against South Carolina in a dominating 52-20 victory over the Gamecocks. That was an NCAA record. He has weapons at his disposal that can create mismatches in this game. You look at Georgia, they have weapons such as Sony Michel, who's not just a running back. They like to utilize Sony Michel in the slot, create mismatches on linebackers and nickelbacks. He has 133 receiving yards on the year. He's a dual threat that offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer can utilize in this matchup against the Alabama secondary. Not only that, but X-Factor Jeb Blazevich can be another Georgia Bulldog that head coach Mark Richt gets involved in this game plan. Jeb Blazevich has great hands, and he's able to stretch the seam down the deep third of the Alabama defense. That's a key in this matchup. When you look at Georgia overall defensively, very solid in run support, only giving up 107 rushing yards per game, and they're only giving up 166 passing yards per game. They've been able to create sacks, led by defensive coordinator Jeremy Pruitt. They have 8 sacks on the year. He's very aggressive with Jordan Jenkins, who leads the team with 3 sacks. They like to utilize him on run blitzes, and Leonard Floyd as well. So that's an advantage for Georgia in this matchup. You look at the team overall in Georgia, they're +2 in turnover margin. In big ball games, you need to create turnovers and run the football, and that's why I like Georgia in this matchup. Nick Chubb, one of the best running backs in college football, him and Leonard Fournette are 2 Heisman Trophy candidates in the SEC. Nick Chubb, a dominant between the tackles runner that can pound that Alabama defensive front, and then Sony Michel is the change of pace back that can hit the hole with great speed. So Georgia has weapons at their disposal. You look at the wide receivers, Isaiah McKenzie, Malcolm Mitchell, and Reggie Davis all have experience, and they match up very well against the Crimson Tide defense. I look at this matchup, and I really feel that Georgia is the most complete team in the SEC. I think they're able to exploit the holes in the Alabama secondary, much like Chad Kelly was 2 weeks ago. And I'm really calling for a dominant Georgia victory. I think they put up a 42 spot on Alabama. I think they put the pressure on Alabama and Jacob Coker early. I think they strike first and pick up a dominant victory. Yes, you heard it here first. A dominant Georgia victory this coming weekend in Athens. I think it's a 42-24 victory over the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think Georgia starts fast. They put the pressure on Coker. I don't think he has the offensive weapons to duel it out with Grayson Lambert on the road. And I'm calling for a 42-24 victory by the Georgia Bulldogs this coming weekend. Georgia takes another step at a possible SEC title this coming weekend. They knock off the 13th ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. Another interesting matchup is Iowa on the road against Wisconsin. Both teams very solid. Iowa's 4-0, Wisconsin's 3-1. Wisconsin's won the last 3 meetings since 2010 by an average margin of victory of 7.3 points per game. There's 2 solid defenses here. Iowa yielding 84 rushing yards per game, and Wisconsin's given up around 82 rushing yards per game. You look at this Iowa defense, though, they have created 14 sacks on the year. That's a top 20 defensive unit led by Kirk Ferentz. Drew Watt and Nate Meyer are 2 dominant defensive tackles that can clog running lanes and force pressure on Joel Stalvey. They have a solid quarterback in Iowa in C.J. Beathard that has completed now over 63% of his passes. He has weapons at his disposal. You look at Ken Zary, the running back, a dual threat running back that's a tough between the tackles runner and can catch the ball out of the backfield. They can utilize him on screens. I like Iowa in this matchup. I think they're hitting on all cylinders. This Iowa offense is averaging over 40 points per game. I think they put the pressure on Wisconsin this weekend and get the upset victory. I think it's close. I think it's a 7-point victory by Iowa, but I think they pick up a 31-24 victory in Madison and shock the Badgers this coming weekend. Another interesting matchup is West Virginia travels to Oklahoma to face the Sooners. Oklahoma's 4-0. They're coming off a bye week right now. They're 3-0, coming off a bye week, which they picked up a victory at home against Tulsa. They allowed 603 total yards to the Tulsa Hurricanes offense. They were winning that game 31-24. They beat up on solid competition. Oklahoma has Akron, Tennessee, and now Tulsa. 3 solid victories on their resume coming out of a bye week to face an upstart West Virginia team. West Virginia's 3-0. They're coming off a 45-6 victory over Maryland last weekend in Morgantown. They have a good quarterback in Skylar Howard, but more importantly, West Virginia is +9 in turnover margin. Last year, the turnover bug bit this team, and West Virginia was -15 in turnover margin overall. That was one of the worst margins in college football, and yet West Virginia still finished with a 7-6 overall record. You look at this Oklahoma team, have some flaws in their defense overall. They're playing very well, but they're coming off a 603-yard performance to Tulsa at home. I think West Virginia is more dynamic. They have 2 solid running backs in Russell Shell and Smallwood, a solid 1-2 punch, and they have a solid secondary led by Carl Joseph that has 4 interceptions. He leads the team with 4 interceptions on the year. This is a team that's very solid against the run, West Virginia, and they're very solid in the secondary with veteran leadership. I think that's important going on the road in this matchup. More importantly, too, Oklahoma's coming off a bye week. Now, I know a lot of people think that coming off a bye week is a beneficial factor heading up into a big ball game. In my opinion, it's more important if the bye week was later in the year so that teams can get healthy when they're banged up due to a schedule. I think in the early part of the season, it can affect an offense, especially when that offense is hitting on all cylinders. It can affect and disrupt the timing. And you look at this offense led by Baker Mayfield that's averaging over 300 passing yards per game. They're averaging 188 rushing yards on the ground with Perrine, but Mayfield has stepped up in recent weeks against Tennessee and against Tulsa. They're hitting on all cylinders. Now they have to come out of a bye week. I have some concerns about that because I think it affects the passing timing of the wide receivers and the quarterback relationship. So that's a key factor in this matchup. If Oklahoma wasn't hitting on all cylinders, the bye week might possibly benefit this team. But in my opinion, this is a detriment. I like West Virginia. I like the way the defense is playing. I like the way they match up against Oklahoma. They've dropped the last 3 meetings. They're 0-3 against Oklahoma, but every game has been close. They've lost by an average margin of defeat by 7.3 points per game. I like Skylar Howard at the quarterback position. I think he matches up very well against that Oklahoma defense. He's a mobile quarterback. He's not like Clint Trickett where he's a pocket passer. He can roll out and they can utilize his mobility on the edge. I think that's a key reason why I like West Virginia in this matchup. I don't think it's as high scoring as a lot of people think. I think West Virginia will like to dictate tempo, utilize the running attack of Smallwood and Shell. And I think West Virginia picks up a methodical victory. I think it gets up into the high 20s, calling for a 28-24 West Virginia victory this coming weekend, and they shock Oklahoma. Still not sold on Oklahoma. They're -4 in turnover margin, have not been able to win the turnover battle consistently. It bit them on the road in Knoxville. I think it hurts them this coming weekend against a solid West Virginia group this coming weekend. Another interesting matchup is top-ranked Notre Dame travels to Death Valley to face Clemson. Now, Clemson has 16 days to prepare for this matchup. They're coming off a bye week, so you think that Notre Dame, it favors them. But Clemson's offense was not hitting on all cylinders. When Mike Williams went down with a neck injury, they struggled offensively on the road in Louisville. They picked up a methodical road victory, 20-17. Deshaun Watson threw for 199 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 INTs, but it was the defense that stepped up and slowed down Bobby Petrino's group. I look for the same type of effort this coming weekend. Not only that, but it's the up-tempo attack of Clemson that could give Notre Dame some problems in that secondary. Notre Dame's secondary allowing a lot of yards, over 200 passing yards per game, but they haven't faced an up-tempo attack like Clemson. Clemson has playmakers on the edge that can really stretch the defense of Notre Dame and put some pressure on Kaiser in that offense. So I think when you look at Notre Dame overall, they've played with a lead. They've been able to jump up early, even though they came from behind against Virginia in that matchup. On the road, this is a more balanced team in Clemson. This is one of the best teams in the ACC. They have speed on the edge where Virginia was not able to capitalize in the same type of way. So I think that's the mismatch in this game against Notre Dame. I like Deshaun Watson. He's a veteran quarterback. And you look at head coach Dabo Swinney, 4 consecutive years with 10-win seasons. I think he holds the coaching edge over Brian Kelly and that staff. Brett Venables doing a fantastic job. This is a very aggressive defense that statistically is still giving up less than 300 yards per game of total offense. I think they're able to mix up some coverage, force Kaiser to make some reads, and I think that Clemson does pick up a dominating home victory this coming weekend. I think they put up over 40 points on Notre Dame. I think they just match up very well against the Fighting Irish, and I think Clemson picks up a 45-30 victory over Notre Dame and gives Notre Dame their first loss on the year. Another intriguing matchup is Michigan State faces off their first Big Ten battle against Purdue. Michigan State lackluster in a 30-10 victory over Central Michigan. They dominated at times on the defensive side of the ball, but weren't able to put away Cooper Rush and the Chippewas. I think they step up this week. They're facing a Purdue team that's decimated, coming off a disappointing loss to Bowling Green, 35-28. They lost in unbelievable fashion. They had that game in the balance, could not pull it out at home, and they lost that game 35-28 to Matt Johnson and the Falcons. They now go on the road. They played very well in this game at home last year, played it very close to the vest. But you look at the last 3 victories by Michigan State, they've come by an average margin of victory of 10.6 points per game. But I think this is a game that really is a statement game for Michigan State. It's a Big Ten game, the first one of the year. I think D'Antonio and the crew will pound the defensive front of Purdue, and I think Michigan State picks up a convincing victory this weekend. I think they put a 50 spot on Purdue. I'm calling for a 55-17 victory over Purdue this weekend. I think Purdue is just decimated from that loss last week. I think they go on the road in East Lansing and cannot keep up with the Spartans in this matchup. 55-17, Michigan State gets the victory this coming weekend. One last game that's very interesting. Texas A&M struggled last week. They picked up an overtime victory, 28-21 over an upstart Arkansas team. I said last week Arkansas was my upset special, but Arkansas had the game in hand, leading 21-13 with about 3 minutes left. They gave way to Texas A&M, allowed Kyle Allen and that offense to pull it out in overtime. Now Texas A&M comes back home to face Mississippi State and Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott and the crew coming off a methodical 17-6 road victory on the Plains in Auburn. They now have to go to Kyle Field in College Station, a very tough environment. You look at this Mississippi State secondary. They've played well to date, only given up 160 passing yards per game, but they haven't faced an offense like Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M gets some home cooking in this game. They forced that secondary into a lot of different looks, forced them into covering guys in space, and I think Kyle Allen and the crew break out this coming weekend. I think they dominate Mississippi State in dominating fashion. I think they pick up a 48-24 victory over Mississippi State. I think that I just like the way they're playing on the defensive side of the ball, the way they were able to step up. Mississippi State can't run the football the same way that Arkansas can, and Texas A&M is able to exploit that secondary that no other team that Mississippi State has faced yet has been able to do. So I think that's the mismatch in this ball game. Texas A&M with a dominating victory in College Station. College football is the best. Stay with me all season long.